Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Nth Degree, which is episode 19 of season 4 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 4th season episode, The Nth Degree. So the Nth Degree is the episode in which, as they're studying a mysterious probe, it probes Barclay, who becomes increasingly intelligent and super smart. In fact, his intelligence soon starts to outscale any human being. In fact, eventually he hooks himself up to a computer because his brain moves even faster than the computer, and he becomes the Enterprise computer, and many are threatened by this, and he promises to take the Enterprise to the other side of the galaxy, and Picard is really much against this and tries to stop him, fails to stop him. They do end up going to the center of the galaxy where they meet this alien species that apparently sent the probe in order to reprogram Barclay to make him smart enough to bring the Enterprise to them, because they like to explore the galaxy, but they like to do it from the comfort of their own home, so they just get other people to come to them. And so after 10 days of exchanging ideas, the Enterprise goes on its merry way, and Barclay returns to his normal shy self, but has retained a smidgen of his intelligence and confident alter ego. So, I watched a bunch of reviews and read some articles, some reviews on this episode, and people were surprisingly positive on this episode. Most of the ones I read were overwhelmingly positive. Now, it's not like they loved this episode. It's definitely not like a top 10. People weren't saying this is one of the best episodes ever. But overall, they were pretty positive on it, and so I'm going to have to be the stick in the mud yet again, and the dissenting voice. Now, that's not to say I hated this episode, because I did not hate this episode. I by no means think it's a terrible episode. I just think it's a bland one. For me, I would call this pretty much the definition of mediocrity. It's just a really mediocre, bland episode in my humble opinion. Now, my opinion, again, might be, as most of the season 4 episodes I watch and review are, might be colored by the fact I had seen this episode a billion times, as seen most of the episodes of season 4 a lot. But, I talked about this a bit in Identity Crisis, because that episode and this episode sort of is when I think of season 4 and how it's kind of bland, and it's more blander than season 3, for example. This is an episode I think about. Now, that's not to say I don't like season 4. I actually do love season 4. It is one of my favorite seasons of TNG, but I don't think it's as good as, say, season 3 or 6, because there's too many bland episodes like this, like too many. Like, we had Devil's Due, Night Terrors, Identity Crisis, and this. But anyway, so this is Barclay's second appearance. So this is the first episode that actually makes him a recurring character and not just the one-off. And here's the thing. I talked a lot about season 4 brings back a lot of other characters, and I never realized before actually that it was season 4 that actually did this a lot, and they hadn't really done this in any previous seasons. They brought back Leah Brahms, the Traveler, Kalar, Vosh, which will be next episode, and many others, and many other they just reference previous episodes a lot more than TNG has, which is a good thing. I'm all in favor of continuity, but part of the reason why they were against continuity is because they want these episodes to be enjoyable for anyone who's just watching them at any random order. which, ironically I'm against. I actually prefer the continuity they did in Deep Space Nine, for example. But this is a case where they're actually kind of right, because I did watch this episode out of order. I saw this episode way before I saw Hollow Pursuits. And looking back on it, I think that really did affect my enjoyment of this episode. I really do think that, because I look at it a different perspective now that I've seen Hollow Pursuits and I know who Barkley is, and I know all the shit that went down in that episode, how he was struggling with, just any social interactions, and he was being late to work, but he formed this friendship with Geordi, and he's, was powering through this. I think that's actually kind of vital information for this episode, because this episode is basically a character story or character study of Barkley. And when viewed as a follow-up to Hollow Pursuits, it actually really works. Like, I really enjoyed the start where we see him performing in a play, and Troy's being really encouraging him, and even though he didn't perform very well, like, the crew is like encouraging him and being really kind and pushing him to be more social, and he's really pushing himself. So this is like a huge step from Hollow Pursuits. However, if you have not seen Hollow Pursuits, which I hadn't when I first saw this episode the first 3 or 4 times, I don't know who this guy is, and I don't care about him. So, and to be fair, that's probably my fault for watching them out of order. But I think a lot of the other episodes of Season 4, it didn't affect me. Like, I was still able to enjoy it, even though I hadn't seen Kalar or Vosh or Leah Brahms previously. I was still able to, or The Traveler. Like, I was still able to get the gist of who these characters are, and I was still able to enjoy the episode. But here, I think that's not the case. I think you need that knowledge of Barkley in order to really get this episode. Otherwise, you don't really care about this character. And that's just my humble opinion. I know some other people may disagree with me on this one. But yeah, I remember seeing this episode, I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And why should I care about him? And also, it was lost on me, like, the nuance of how much he improved and how socially awkward he used to be. Like, all of that adds a lot of nuance, which is missing if you hadn't seen Hollow Pursuits. But anyway, I did want to talk more about this play since I brought it up. The play that they perform in this episode is a Cyrano de Bergerac, which I've heard of it, but I didn't know the name of the play. I was aware of it, and I'll be quite frank and honest. I was aware of it mostly through this 1987 Steve Martin movie called Roxanne. In fact, when I saw this episode at first, I'm like, hey, he's doing Roxanne. Now, let me be clear. I was aware that they weren't really basing it off of the 1987 Steve Martin movie. I was aware that that Steve Martin movie was based off of a classic play, and that this classic play is what they're performing. I mean, I knew that. But it still made me think of Roxanne, because I never saw the play. I never saw any of the other film adaptations of the play, so I just knew it from Roxanne, and so that was my reference. So Roxanne was an 87 Steve Martin film. I think Daryl Hannah played the character of Roxanne, and he had that long nose and everything, and that's why I instantly recognized it. But it was like updated to modern times, like it was taking place during a Colorado ski resort. And I remember, because I used to watch like some HBO and Showtime and other channels like that a lot when I was a teenager, and they would show like the same movies like over and over again, and so I'd end up just watching parts of it, just flip through the channels and watch part of the movie, and I'd see probably see the same movie repeatedly, and that happened with this movie. That's why I was so familiar with it, even though it wasn't like that big of a hit, and I'm sure a lot of people had never even heard of it. But I was seeing it so many times, so I was like so familiar with it. And it's funny because when I went on Wikipedia and I was looking up film adaptations of Cyrano de Bergerac, it mentioned a couple, but it didn't have Roxanne on there, and instead it had Roxanne listed on loose adaptations or inspired by it, and it had other films like The Truth About Cats and Dogs. If you remember that film, it's with Janine Garofalo, however you pronounce her name, and Uma Thurman. So they did like a gender swap thing where instead of it was ugly girl giving the words to a pretty girl so she could woo a man. But anyway, and I was like, that's wrong because, yeah, that movie is very loosely based off of Cyrano de Bergerac, but Roxanne is pretty much a straight adaptation. It's just adapted to take place in modern times instead of the olden times, or at least that's my understanding, because, mind you, I've never read the play or saw the play, but from what I understand, like whenever I see reference to that play, all the stuff that they're referencing happened in Roxanne, like the guy having a long nose for that, like flat out. It's not a loose adaptation. It's a freaking adaptation. It's just like Romeo and Juliet, that Leonardo DiCaprio one. I mean, it's just adapted to take place in modern times. But anyway, that is really neither here nor there. I just wanted to go on that rant about that. But, so yes, this is the first time we see Dr. Crusher's acting troupe, and this will become a recurring thing for her for the rest of the series. And I kind of like that. It did kind of come out of nowhere, but I'm fine with that. I think it is an interesting character beat for her. As I noted in Data's Day, this seems like a natural progression off of her being a tap dancer that she would be into theater and stuff like that. So I think it works for her character, and it is interesting seeing her interact with Barkley, who does a very bad job. But I like how the crew is encouraging him and is being very polite about it, and because they know the issues that he had, and they know how brave he's being just by showing up there. And of course, they do this so they can contrast it later on when Barkley has the, smarts or whatever, when he does this great acting performance, which I did think was a really good performance. So I thought that Dwight Schultz did a really good job in this episode overall, because he had to go play all these different versions of Broccoli. I always call him Broccoli. Barkley. But I heard, and I don't know if this is true because I didn't follow this up with any research because I'm lazy, so maybe it's not true, but I heard that Dwight Schultz in present day has turned into a very staunch conservative, which just goes to show how much Barkley sucks if that's the case. Anyway, I don't know if that's true or not, but anywho, yeah, it was a great follow-up to see him, the way that he progressed after getting the smarts and become more confident and hit on Counselor Troy, which is something that he would never be able to do before, not even in the holodeck. But I was reminded a lot of Transfigurations when LaForge was touched by John Doe and became super confident all of a sudden, and started, making out with that girl who rejected him before. And I'm sorry, I actually like Transfigurations better. I like that storyline better, even though the storyline didn't appear very much in Transfiguration, so it wasn't like the main point of it, and they sadly never followed up on it, which I think they bloody well should have. I'm very upset that they didn't. Would have avoided making Geordi a, pathetic, nerdy creep. Like, they should have gave him a love interest. But I don't know. Like, even though we didn't see it that much in that episode, that's what makes it kind of better, actually, because it's not that interesting of a storyline. Because this is what the whole episode hangs. They hang the entire episode on this storyline of Barkley becoming better. Well, not just more confident, but also more intelligent until he gets, like, ridiculously intelligent, where he's beyond any humanoid being that we've seen. But here's the thing. So that's all the episode has, because once we get to towards the end and Barkley takes over the ship and he's like, oh, I have to take you to this other planet, and Picard and Worf are like trying really hard to disconnect him, even though they know that will kill Barkley. So they're acting as if the Enterprise is in danger of being destroyed. Like, the way that they overreact, I mean, granted, they don't like the fact that Barkley's taking over the computer and he's taking over the Enterprise and he's not listening to orders. I get that. That makes sense. But to go as far as to do something that they know will lead to his death, i.e. killing him, and that has to be like an extreme circumstance, like the ship is in imminent danger, which it is not. There's nothing to indicate that it isn't. Someone even pointed out that, I don't know how much I agree with this, but there's a smidgen of truth in it, that Data has taken over the Enterprise before, and Wesley is even taking over the Enterprise naked now, and they still trust them. Even though when they trust, like in Night Terrors, they gave Data command, he was the only one operating the ship. So they still trust him even though he's done shady shit in the past. So why is it that they're so distrusting of Barkley? Like, it seems to be like a smidge of them being very jealous of the fact that he's super intelligent. This is definitely true of Geordi earlier, not just in one scene, like that one scene where Barkley like made the shields go 300% up or whatever, and Barkley is like, oh God, thank God I saved the ship, and Geordi just looked pissed off and mad as fuck just because how dare you talk directly to Picard and not go through me first, even though, hey Geordi, asshole, the fucking ship was about to be destroyed. He shouldn't have to go through you. And then, but Barkley had the manners, had the wherewithal to even apologize, saying, I'm sorry if I subverted your authority. And then LaForge is still being pissy, like, oh, don't mention it. And then he was being pissy in other scenes as well. It wasn't just that scene. He was being like seeming jealous of the fact that, and so when Picard and Worf and Riker are so distrusting and so like suspicious and so like hostile towards Barkley, it seems that maybe I'm just inferring things that isn't there, but it seems to me that it has a lot to do with their jealousy as well. They're just jealous of the fact that he's super smart and much smarter than them and can do, control the ship more easily and do these other things more easily, and so they're freaked out about it, and they go as far as to try to kill him just to remove him from the computer, which I think is a vast overreaction. There was no indication that the ship was in imminent danger. And anyway, all that is moot because it turns out Barkley wasn't trying to harm them, and as soon as they get there, they just meet this weird-looking, dumb alien head, and and Barkley's like, oh yeah, they just sent us to the other galaxy because they would like to meet people and do cultural exchange. So all that like tense moments of, oh, we gotta remove Barkley from the ship, and oh, this is so tense, and it was a waste of time. It was contrived writing, I dare say, just a way to create tension when none actually should exist, because Picard and crew are actually overreacting to Barclay, and yeah, the revolution that resolution that it's just some aliens sending people, reconfiguring people so they can come meet them. What a waste of time. So this is what I'm saying about this episode. It's like the majority of it is Barclay becoming super smart and super confident. It's like, the transfiguration storyline, which isn't that interesting, and they're just focusing on that, which isn't enough to hang an episode on. And then it goes from that to this contrived bullshit of, the ship is in danger, and Picard overreacting to, yes, psych, it was just some aliens trying to meet us. What a waste of time. Like, how is this interesting? I don't think this is interesting at all. In fact, let's talk about how impractical the Cytherians are. They really expecting to, first of all, they sent this probe, and the probe almost destroyed this, what's it called? The research station, whatever the hell it's called. Nearly destroyed it. And Argillus cluster, something like that. But anyway, nearly destroyed it, and then it went after the Enterprise, followed the Enterprise, chased the Enterprise. In fact, in this case, it is highly implied that the Enterprise was in direct danger from this probe. And the Enterprise only got out of this danger because they did this. Barclay was super smart and was able to raise the shields. But the intention of the probe was, as Barclay says later on, wasn't to reconfigure Barclay, as to reconfigure ships. But in doing so, they were just hurting the ships and destroying them. So it's just, in other words, it's just like happy circumstance that the Enterprise D survived this fucking probe. And so this is what we're innocent, we just want to meet other species, but we'll send out probes that will probably fucking kill you. It's really contrived writing that really doesn't add up. Not to mention how the concept of, let's force people to come visit us because we're too lazy to leave our galaxy, and how, yes, the Federation is okay with that because that's their mission as well, and they can get that, even though you do get the sense that Picard's really fucking annoyed by this. But imagine other more hostile aliens being forced to go there against their will. They're not going to respond too kindly to that. So this whole concept is just silly. But anywho, I do have to mention the Star Trek card game yet again. Because the collectible card game, I've talked about this in other reviews, because I used to play this a lot when I was younger. And basically how it is you have cards that are missions, so it has planet or space, and you set it up in a line to form like a timeline, and then you have cards of like people. You put them underneath the ship, and the ship moves across the space line, and each planet or mission will have like a range, so it goes like 4, 3, and the ship has a total range level like 9, so you add the range of each mission in order to move your ship along the line, and you can like do the space missions now, or the beam and the away team to the planet and do the planet missions. And if you do a space, in order to do mission, you have to have like the characters on the cards that you have to have the skills required for the mission, but you have to get through dilemmas first, which are cards your opponent puts underneath the mission. So when you try to attempt a mission, you have to go through the dilemmas, and that dilemmas try to stop you or kill your people, or block you in some way. And one of the dilemmas that I remember most clearly, it was one of the most powerful dilemmas, was the Cytherians, which is a space dilemma. So if you try to do a space mission, you got this dilemma. It was Cytherians who had that picture of that big head goofy guy. And what it would make you do, it would force you to fly your ship to the other side of the space line. So the other end, the opposite end of the line, and so that way the person's wasting all the time going to the other end instead of doing missions. But it did give the person who completed it 15 points, but they had to waste the ship. A lot of times, the way around this would just be to get another ship and just beam everyone off of that ship that's stuck there and beam them onto the new ship, so you can just abandon the ship that's stuck in the Cytherians thing. But if you wanted the 15 points, you could leave the minimal amount of crew required to operate the ship, which was, depending on the ship, was like 2 or 3 characters, and just beam everyone else off the ship and then go do missions with that other ship while that one's still going all the way to the end of the timeline. But this, again, is neither here nor there, but it's what I think about every time I watch this episode, especially when I see the Cytherians at the end. I'm like, oh, so they got that dilemma where they have to go to the other end of the space line. Anyway, so the I wish I could remember what the hell is Carl, but that science outpost thingy. Hold on, I'm gonna look this up because I need to know. Yeah, so it's just called the Argus Array. It's like a space telescope thingy. Because it will make another appearance in Parallels over in season 7, which when I saw that episode, I'm like, oh, so this is like another sort of space telescope thingy, just like the one in the Nth Degree. But then I realized, no, it's not another one; it's the same one. Always dealing with the stupid space telescope, but Federation, Starfleet is supposed to be scientific in nature. It makes sense that they would have a space telescope trying to look in the future, but we just make sure the Cardassians don't think you're trying to spy on them. Anyway, I guess I'll talk a little bit about Troy and the sort of Barclay hitting on her, because there's a couple scenes I've heard people comment on a lot, such as when she mentions that Barclay made a pass at him and it was a very good one, and then after the meeting Riker is like, oh, you didn't say if he was successful or not, and she just smiles at him and just walks away and doesn't answer, and Riker looks very amused by this. I don't think Riker's jealous, by the way. I think he was just very amused by it, and I think Troy was kind of fucking with him by not answering. So I actually like that scene. I think it makes sense and it's a good scene. But then there's the end of the episode, which I never really thought too much about. I never really tried to analyze it. When after Barclay returned to normal, and Geordi is like, oh, yes, Barclay, I'm so glad to have you back. I still need your help doing this diagnosis. He's like, I'll get right on it, Commander. And then Troy's like, no, excuse me, but I believe that we have a date scheduled. And Barclay's like, no, let's not do that. And Troy's like, no, we had this scheduled, and we're going to go for a walk in the Arboretum, and takes his arm and like hooks her arm around his, and walks out and saying, we're going to go on a date. Now, I've heard a lot of people complain about that, saying that what exactly is she doing there? Is she just... Some people even speculate that she's like casual sex is part of her therapeutic moment, but then other people mentioning how inappropriate that is for her. She's his counselor, his therapist, and why is she encouraging his flirtation and like saying, I'm going on the date, and touching his, touching hands and being like really intimate. Like, I don't know, like I get that this does seem inappropriate, but I never like really thought of it in those terms. I mean, you could say that it's her like trying to encourage him and say that because he's mourning the loss of the fact that he's not this super smart person was super confident, that he's gone back to being socially awkward, and that's really disappointing for him. But she's trying to build his confidence and be like, look, you still have like, because all the super smart stuff that he did was in him. The probe just brought that out, like enhanced his natural abilities. So those abilities are still there within him. The probe didn't just make them up, and so she's trying to encourage him to be like, look, you can be much better. But because she's his counselor and he's in therapy, it just doesn't seem right, like the appropriate way to handle it, personally. In fact, earlier in the episode when he was being all confident and hit on her and she said that wouldn't be appropriate, she's right. That's how she should behave. But no, because he's feeling down, that she does. And by the way, when I first saw this, or when I saw it every time, I never got the impression that the date was going to go anywhere. Like, she was just doing that to be polite, and they were going to go to the Arboretum, look around, have a pleasant evening, and that would be the end of it, and there would be no further dates or contact or any intimacy involved at all. That she was just, being encouraging. But, so yeah, and I still think that's the case, and that's the way this show was trying to say, like, oh, Barkley's still better, and then he does that bullshit with the chest thing as he walks out the door too, to say, oh, maybe he still has some smarts after all, hoo-hoo. But it's never, of course, mentioned ever again in future episodes, though. But anyway, yeah, I don't know, so that always seemed like a normal sort of sitcom-y television thingy to do, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's not exactly appropriate behavior for therapists to be displaying towards their patients. Just my opinion, anyway. Anyway, I would like to now thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Very much appreciated. I want to first give a very big special thanks to Brendan Neilhouse for all your support. Very much appreciated. And I also would like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Avals, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, so I may be unique here, but this is my favorite Barkley episode. It was also interesting enough, the first one I ever saw him in, where I saw him as an extra, perhaps more in the lines with O'Brien and Keiko, and the pilot in this episode, the pilot we would never see again, but at least not red-shirted, thank goodness. I actually like this sci-fi tale where one believes he's become better, more confident due to some influence, and then does the bold computer mainframe where he becomes the computer. I don't know why, I just loved it then and always do in rewatches. There even was a hint at the end that somehow Barkley still had some after effect, which is if there was continuity, at least to Deep Space Nine Degree, that would have been an interesting measure to go. Instead of, transporter phobia, which I believe was our next time with him. Troy and Geordi are fine in their roles. The transparent head alien, that was the only borderline comical element. And the fact that apparently how they got to them via super warp disappears from canon much quicker than any Mushroom Network ever did. Still, I give it 8 out of 10 Troy smug grins to Riker when not answering him if she took Barclay's good pass at her. LOL. So, yeah. So you had a different reaction to this episode, seeing it for the first time, because, yeah, like you, I had also, this is the first Barclay episode I ever saw, but I had a different reaction to it. I thought, who the hell is this character and why the hell should I care about him? I don't. I don't know if I have a favorite Barclay episode. I mean, I could say Ship in a Bottle, but that's not really a Barclay episode. He just happens to be in it. Like, really, the only Barclay episodes is Hollow Pursuits, this one, the transportophobia called, what's that called? Realm of Fear, and maybe the one on Voyager. God, what's that one on Voyager called? Pathfinder, that's right. And then I guess that other one with the Ferengi on Voyager could have been called a Barclay episode as well. And those episodes, well, Pathfinder was okay, but that Ferengi one sucked. It was The Inside Man, I think it was called. So I don't really have, like, if you're telling about the Barclay episodes where he is the main focus, I don't really have one. I guess I would have to choose Hollow Pursuits just out of default, but I don't think that episode's great either. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, somehow this was only the second time I saw this episode. Great to see Barclay again. Besides Rolaren, he is the character who should have appeared much more often. The interface shooting light beams onto Barclay's head looks a little bit ridiculous. The model of the Argus array seems to be recycled from the motion picture, or at least it reminded me strongly of the Epsilon 9 station. I liked how many of the characters, maybe besides Riker, were integrated into the story and had their moments. The whole concept of aliens exploring space by bringing in to them is a fascinating idea. My rating is a 7 out of 10. Yeah, so the Argus array is notably different than the Epsilon 9 station from Star Trek The Motion Picture. That station, I remember they actually consulted NASA on what a practical working futuristic space station might actually look like, and it does look really practical and as something that might be realistic. And that's why they never did that ever again. Because instead they scrapped it for the typical outpost thingy the cone-shaped thingy we see in Star Trek 3, even though that's not at all practical, but it looks cooler. And to be fair, as I said, Star Trek has never been like realistic when it comes to science anyway, so I think they probably shouldn't have consulted NASA anyway, but they realized, yeah, I mean, this doesn't look cool on the screen, doesn't matter how practical it actually is. And so I think it is a little different. It's similar. I can see what you're saying. It's definitely similar, but the Argus array always seemed like a collection of hexagons, like stacked together. It's a bit different. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, the return of Barclay. He goes from zero in Hollow Pursuits to hero in this episode. What is the message here? All you need to do was stop your addiction and you basically become a productive part of society. There should be an episode in between this to show Barclay's struggle to adapt to his new improvement life. Star Trek usually does a great job at social commentary. However, they drop the ball big time here. I know who Mark will blame here. I think he would even blame him for some modern day episodes of Star Trek LOL. In this case, I blame Michael Piller for making Barkley the center of attention. He goes from being shy and so socially awkward to someone that has complete confidence. Sorry to say, but life isn't that bloody easy. The scene when Data asks Riker, "Why are you clapping?" Barkley's poor performance, and he said it's polite to clap, which is fine to support Barkley, but a standing ovation is way over the top. I like this episode, but I have to drop my rating for these things. Now, to see who wrote this episode, I hope it's not Ronald D. Moore. Joe Manowski wrote this episode, and I will look to see what other episodes he did write. I swear to all my gods, I didn't check this beforehand. Ronald D. Moore was the story editor. Oh shit. At least Barkley had one great episode during his time with TNG. The other episodes he appeared in has a running theme: shyness, lacking self-confidence, a genius, was that nosophobia, and workaholism. My rating is 5. Feck Joe Manowski wrote 4 episodes of DS9, then was shipped over to Voyager, where that show didn't care for his own premise. Out of 10. P.S. Why was Michael Piller fired, and by whom? Cough, cough, RB. You mentioned that during your review of Future Imperfect. Okay, so let me circle back to that one, because that's a huge one. But let me start with some of the stuff you said earlier in this review. I don't blame Rick Berman for this one, and to be fair, I'm not as upset over it as you are. So Rick Berman's only responsible for the major stuff that really sucks. So yeah, I'll agree Michael Piller deserves the blame on this, but I disagree it's that big of a deal, because he doesn't really go from zero to hero until he gets zapped by the alien probe. So the message here isn't all you need to do is stop your addiction and become a productive part of society. The message is all you need to do is get zapped by an alien probe that makes you super intelligent, and you become a productive member of society. I mean, I think you might be arguing that even before he got zapped by the probe, that he became this instantly productive member of society. But if that's the case, I would disagree with that interpretation, because he's still struggling. He's still shy, which is indicated by the fact his acting performance is terrible, and he keeps tripping up on his own way, and he still stutters. He's just gradually become more accepting. So for me, it actually rings true that it's a gradual process that's still in process. I mean, the shit later in the episode when he's like super confident, that's because of sci-fi bullshit. That's not saying that all you need to do is stop your addiction and instantly fine. I think it seems to me it is portrayed as a kind of realistic, gradual process of him improving, but he still has a lot to do. Like, he still is very socially awkward. So that's why I don't think it's that big of a deal. Let's see. There was another thing I wanted to address. Oh, Joe Manowski writing the episode. Yeah, he became a major writer on Voyager. He actually wrote a couple episodes of Discovery in season 1 as well, but he was mainly known for Voyager, and I talked about him before in other reviews. I'm very mixed on it. He did some good stuff. I'm not going to say he's a terrible writer, but I'm not a fan of his work. Let me put it that way. His episodes tend to be more bland, in my opinion. The fact that he outright said he doesn't give a fuck about continuity makes me not like him. But anyway, that is another topic from another time. Okay, so let's get back to why was Michael Piller fired and by whom. So this is something I want to talk about a lot more when I get to Voyager, because this happened in Voyager. So Michael Piller, as I mentioned, was hired in season 3. He was the showrunner for season 3. up to season 3, 4, and 5 of Next Generation. And then he was technically the showrunner of season 6 and 7, but he was mostly doing Deep Space Nine. So he helped create Deep Space Nine, and he was the showrunner for seasons 1 and 2 of Deep Space Nine, which was airing at the same time as 6 and 7 of Next Gen. So his attention was kind of divided, and from my understanding, he still had final say over the scripts of season 6 and 7 of TNG, but he wasn't running the day-to-day. That was Jerry. Jerry Taylor effectively took over as showrunner for TNG in those last 2 seasons, but he was still like the head producer, so he could still have final say on what scripts were allowed and maybe call for a rewrite or whatnot. But as I said, he was focusing more on Deep Space Nine, to my understanding. But towards the end of season 2 of Deep Space Nine, he started to drop out of that as well, because he was starting to develop Voyager with Jerry Taylor and Rick Berman. And so towards the end of season 2, he pretty much was making Ira Steven Behr was becoming more prominent as the showrunner. And then when season 3 of Deep Space Nine started, Ira Steven Behr became the showrunner of Deep Space Nine, and Michael Piller went over to Voyager full time. So Michael Piller was the showrunner of Voyager of season 1 and 2. So in season 2 of Voyager, what happened is that Michael Piller kept pushing for serialized stories involving the Kazon, involving Seska, involving Chakotay having a son. And the writers, all the writing staff apparently were very much against this and hated it and said they couldn't stand working under him because he kept pushing these things. And this includes Jerry Taylor, who apparently was also against these ideas. And so some people even describe it as like a very hostile situation, like a civil war, maybe almost similar to season 2 of TNG. And so towards the end of season 2 of Voyager, the writers went to Rick Berman and said, it's either him or us. Like, you get rid of him or we're leaving. Like, all the writers, or pretty much all of them. And so Rick Berman, being Rick Berman, made the wrong decision and did what they said and got rid of Michael Piller. And but he wasn't fired per se. He was, from my understanding, he was kicked upstairs. Is that he was still producer, he was still involved in like the production money side of things, but had no creative say on the show whatsoever. He had no creative input. He was completely removed from the writer's room, and Jerry Taylor took over. And that is something I am going to discuss in a lot more detail when I get to season 3 of Voyager, which is still a ways off, unfortunately. But yeah, I will get into this detail. And so Piller was still part of Star Trek because after that he would write Star Trek Insurrection, which a lot of people blame him for unfairly, because in this case, sorry to use my catchphrase, but I blame Rick Berman for Insurrection, because the original script Piller had written for Insurrection was actually sounds really amazing, and it's similar to the DS9 episode Inter Arman Silent Legis, and it involved Data and Picard like having a disagreement on what should be done about the Romulans. In fact, it sort of them becoming like working against each other, and that sounds amazing. That's like Star Trek Next Generation Civil War or something. But no, guess who the fuck shot that down and said we can't do that? Rick fucking Berman. So yes, I do blame Rick Berman for Insurrection and not Piller. But anyway, but from my understanding, the Insurrection was the last thing that Piller really did for Star Trek. But anywho, that was a big aside. Stephen Kennedy has another comment who says, I would have liked to see more with the Cytherians and being explorers. It's more like kidnappers. Did you notice Riker's face when Troy mentioned that Barclay made a pass towards her, but she wouldn't say if he was successful? Riker was a little worried that he wouldn't be the alpha male anymore on the Enterprise. Yeah, so anyway, I did want to comment on what several people said about how they wish would have gotten more of Barclay. Like Stephen Kennedy even said, oh, there should have been an episode between this and Hollow Pursuits. And please, no, we do not need more of Barclay. I'm sorry, I don't hate Barclay. I don't really care that much for him. I don't really need to see more of him. I don't think we needed more Barclay. I think we got plenty of him. That's fine. We needed less of him on Voyager. I will be very vocal about that. The fact they tried to all of a sudden make him a main character in the final season, bullshit. But that's that's a topic for another time. So, final comment is from Brandon Neal-Howells, who says, I'm not entirely sure what's happening in this episode, except that Barclay becomes a super genius. I preferred his acting as Cyrano de Bergerac myself. Apart from that, I feel this journey beyond the galactic barrier was done better in Where No One Has Gone Before. 5 walks in the Arboretum out of 10. Well, thank you. Well, there we go. Someone else who's also lukewarm on this episode. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So, my rating for the Nth Degree out of 10 is going to be a 5 average. I was torn between the 5 and the 6, but the contrivance at the end of the episode is what made me go down to a 5 rather than a 6. But it deserves to be right in that middle space of average is a good thing for a good word for it. I would call it mediocre is another accurate word. It's just blah. It's just bland. Like, it's not terrible. Like, there's some interesting things. Like, I don't watch this episode and go, oh, God, this sucks. Like, there's some interesting things in there. Like, the Cytherians are, I guess, interesting enough. And even though they make no fucking sense. And Barclay becoming super smart. Like, the character journey. I do like the character progress that Barclay's made it since the last time we saw him. I think, as I said, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that his character would progress in that way, and that the crew would push him that way. But then that's kind of undone by the fact that Geordi gets super fucking jealous. In fact, the whole crew gets super fucking jealous and start being like, "How dare you be smarter than me?" Like, don't betray my crew like that. The Enterprise crew should be better than that. Especially Geordi. You don't need to make Geordi any worse after fucking Galaxy's Child already assassinated his character. But again, I'm not saying it's terrible. I'm saying it's kind of undermines this episode. Any good things about this episode, which isn't that great to begin with. It's just a bland episode, and I would normally just skip it and not waste my time with it. So anyway, that is it for my review of the Nth Degree. So let's see what's coming up on my channel next. Thursday, tomorrow will be I'll cover the next new episode of Discovery, which I believe will be episode 6. On Saturday, which is May the 4th, I'll of course do my annual May the 4th Star Wars video. This time I'm up to Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And then next Monday, which is May 6th, is my 10-year anniversary of Enchantment of Eternity, and that's what I'm calling it because the oldest video I made, which is a review that I called it Enchantment of Eternity because there's some videos that are older, but that's before I actually, started calling this channel Enchantment of Eternity. So the oldest one was this review for a Game of Thrones episode in May 6, 2014. So it's been 10 years. So I'm going to be doing a live stream of 10-year anniversary. I'm going to re-release my review of Interstellar, which was taken down 9 years ago, and I never bothered to put it back up until now. And I'm going to redo my top 50 favorite movies of all time, because I did a series of videos right when I first started this channel, about maybe not 10 years ago, maybe closer to 9 years ago. But yeah, I'm going to update that. I'm going to do it in just one video instead of a whole series, and I'm going to go by a lot quicker. And I'm going to update it because I've changed my mind on some movies, and I added some newer releases to the mix. So that will be Monday. And then Wednesday, speaking of Star Wars, I'll be reviewing The Bad Batch Season 3. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation and many other videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.